Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this morning's executive meeting. Do we have any apologies?
Convener, apologies have been submitted by Councillor Bissett.
Apologies from Councillor Nicholl.
And we have apologies this morning from the Chief Executive, who is attending a meeting at the Scottish Government in relation to child protection. Any declarations of interest? No. The first item of the minute of the meeting held on the 14th of May. Is there any inaccuracies that anybody wishes to raise, or anything that members wish to question? No, happy to agree. We now move on to the rolling action log. There's a wee bit more information started to be included, and I hope that that gives explanations to members where required. But is there anything anybody wishes to raise or question at this time?
The fly tipping, whatever it's called, PDP, it won't be reporting back until January 2020.
Mrs. Geisler?
Well, finally, I assume. Yeah.
Yes, the matter was considered at a recent scrutiny committee, and that was the timetable that was discussed at that meeting for a report back. So there was an update given to the scrutiny committee on progress, so we can certainly review.
Would you wish an earlier report to come back?
It seemed to me, and I probably misread it wrongly, that there was only one item that required the information from an outside source. I just wondered why it would take 6 months.
We can certainly bring that back sooner if members would prefer.
Okay.
But as I say, it's linked into the scrutiny committee. I wasn't at the scrutiny committee, so I don't know what was agreed there.
Okay, Councillor Gardner?
I'm pretty sure that was tied in with looking at the flight time after the new proposals had been put in place, and I think that's how it was lengthier than we thought. But I was a wee bit surprised to see it in January, right enough, but that was the reason behind it, I think.
But perhaps we could look at it and see if it's appropriate that an update report comes for members. Okay. Yeah. But we'll check that out and we'll come back and update members. Okay. Anything else on the rolling action log? Item 5 is a referral from the Corporate Partnership Forum. Stuart, you're going to take this one?
Yep, thank you, Convener. These two policies were considered and approved at the last meeting of the Corporate Partnership Forum. The first policy relates to our health and safety policy, and the changes that have been made is to remove some duplication that was in the last iteration of the policy. As you know, we are rewriting all our policies to follow good plain English guidance, so we've taken the opportunity to do that with the health and safety policy. We have realigned the roles and responsibilities of head teachers to those of service managers rather than heads of service as they were previously, and we've put specific responsibility into the policy for the implementation of the Council's safety management system as a specific responsibility. The second of the two policies relates to our recruitment and selection policy, and section 4.6 of the report sets out the main changes that have been made to that particular policy. Committee are asked to approve both of these policies for implementation.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Ultimately, my understanding is there's no actual change of policy. It's just a combination of tidying up, and I think everybody would welcome the use of plain English. Although I think at times that we still need to go back and look at what's plain English. And there was no particular issues raised by the trade unions in this. Okay, thank you. Okay, members, I'll open it up to any questions or comments. Councillor Reid.
Just two or three quick ones. Under elected members, it says elected members should nominate an elected member as health and safety champion. I'm not volunteering, but just wondered if that has happened or when it will happen.
Thanks, convener. Some time ago, council agreed who our health and safety champion would be, and it's Councillor Meiklejohn,
So that was at a council meeting, was it?
I believe.
Okay. I must have fallen asleep at that one.
It was some time ago, indeed. I do remind some members about the clear desk policy every now and again.
Speaking of plain English, what's an HR business partner?
HR business partner is somebody in our human resources division who will be working with Rona's team, Robert's team, in providing HR support in the development of their business cases or their day-to-day business activities.
Okay, thank you. Final point is page 29. Apparently, when someone who's been appointed starts work, we should compare them to a photograph just to make sure it's the right person. Did this happen with the chief executive? Did we take out a photograph and say, yes, you're the right guy?
That would have been checked by HR on the day for that particular case, but it would be the line manager, whoever's headed up the appointments panel, who would check that out.
Does that really happen in reality? Does it?
It does, yeah.
My goodness me. Quite Kafkaesque, actually.
Yes, you're asked to bring your passport by form of identification.
Still, does it? Goodness sake. What a paranoid society we live in these days,
I thought you were going to ask if it was a true likeness of the photograph, because it was maybe taken 30
I
years
suppose
ago.
it could be an identical twin, something like that. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Reid. Councillor Bowes.
Yeah, photographic ID is used everywhere now, from not just from when you're starting, but even when you're going on to new projects and things like that, you're having to produce photographic ID all the time now. You can't just come in with a bit of paper saying who you are. Now, I looking at the report from what I'm reading into it, and again, hopefully I have picked up the plain English side of it, it seems to be simplifying the reports in here. And I do like the fact that we're actually now using hyperlinks a lot more, because other than that, some reports can just look as if they would choke a horse, and with the hyperlinks, then people can dig into what they actually want to see. That's very positive.
Okay, thank you. Any other members? We're happy to agree with changes. Okay, thank you. Okay. Item 6, we move into the policy section. It's a policy development panel review of taxi policies and an interim report. Now, can I invite Councillor Murtagh to join us? Okay, just before we ask Councillor Murtagh to speak, I'm going to ask Mr Moody to say a few words in relation to the paper.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I won't speak at any length on this, and this is because this report represents the first fruits of the policy development panel on taxi licensing, and it's therefore more appropriate the portfolio holder and the chair of the policy development panel sets out the findings in a bit more detail. But just to introduce the fact that this is the first report from this PDP, and it represents the PDP's recommendations in relation to a particular aspect of taxi licensing, which is the issue of the medical assessment of taxi drivers and private hire drivers. And certainly from my perspective, these are sensible and well balanced recommendations which the PDB has made, and plainly after, I think, careful consideration of a number of factors and benchmarking across other local authorities, and also, I think, taking careful cognizance of the statutory framework in which taxi licensing takes place. The second recommendation is to do with reviewing the taxi tariff once each year rather than on a more irregular and ad hoc basis. And again, I think this is a sensible and reasonable recommendation which has been made by the PDP, and will avoid a situation, for instance, which we had last year, where there was a relatively large increase in the taxi tariff to allow the council to review it each year and assess whether there is an objective reason to raise the tariff each year. So those are the two recommendations, and they link into the next report as well, which is actually the recommendation on the taxi tariff, and you'll see, if you've read ahead, that it recommends no increase this year. So at that point, I think it's probably appropriate to hand over to Councillor Murtagh.
Okay, Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks very much, Colin. It's nice to have the words sensible and well balanced next to something that I've chaired with minuted and very welcome, hopefully. But I'm happy to move on to speak to the recommendations contained within the report. I don't want to particularly bore you with the history of how we came to them, but I'm happy to answer any questions on the examination of the detail. And also Brian Douglas, who's been invaluable to us throughout the panel, is here as well. What I would say is that at all times, consensus in our discussion has been really important, and we've reached these conclusions unanimously and with a great deal of depth in our discussions. I'd like to thank Brian and Alison for their hard work in gathering evidence and consultation with their professional colleagues across the country, other local authorities, and a significant amount of discussion and amendment with the medical community in Falkirk to reach what is now presented to you as a far more positive situation than what we currently have at the moment. We agreed at the panel that we would consider this matter of taxi medicals early in stages, so that because we currently have an untenable situation with only one GP able to make the medical assessments for all new applicants and for reassessments, and that has to change. So having agreed quite early on in the process that we did wish to continue with a Group 2 style medical assessment as the appropriate level of cover from a public protection perspective for taxi drivers in Falkirk, we then looked at what improvements we could make to the current form in consultation with GPs, and those recommendations are also contained today to have some amendment of that. Naturally, we had to examine quite carefully why it was that we got down to this situation with declining GPs, and unsurprisingly this involved quite a protracted consultation process and reconsultation, but that was very important to get the right recommendations towards you today, but it did take longer than we had anticipated. So we're therefore recommending an increase in fee that you'll see before you of £75, and as it's explained, that fee hadn't increased over the time that we had first began to do these taxi medical assessments. So built in to prevent us getting to a similar situation, we've also asked for a regular review of that as we go forward, and also to formalise contracts, which we didn't have before, so that we can regularise this process and make sure we don't end up in the same position again. We did look at alternatives to the GP model, but it became quite early on in that process of consideration from the panel to look at things like occupational health assessments or GPs being on particular days, that it wouldn't have worked with the operational workings of the trades, and it wouldn't have fitted in with kind of a best value model given what we would have to put in place. So we also consulted widely with the taxi drivers themselves and through the forum, and they're happy that the situation which we currently have will work for them, and we have a good relationship at present. I would say I'm quite confident in that for the things which we've got to consider going forward, and that's been important as this PDP process has been undertaken. So as it's outlined in the report, the cost should be fairly neutral, because we are also proposing to increase although all new applicants always have to undergo this medical test, the time where they first have to come back for reassessment will increase and be more in line with other local authorities. So it should be a fairly cost neutral proposal that we're putting forward. And as Colin said, finally, what we're proposing to annualise the taxi tariff as a process, and having run last year's review around this time, and finding that operationally that worked out for all concerned, whether it was the trade or the testing station or the people that we have to consult in the statutory periods, we're asking that that is also more or less put in for the schedule each year at this time, in order that that process can work smoothly, because timings are quite important for fitting in with testing stations. So we've asked that we would aim to do that around that same time, and as said, you'll note from the next paper's recommendations that we're proposing no change, and obviously last year we know that we had had a period where we had a long gap, and therefore when we came to review it there was a big jump, which caused obviously anxiety for the trade and for the public. And but as you can see from the appendices, if you do go into the next paper, you know, we're still in Falkirk good value, cheaper than most of our neighbouring authorities, whether it's Fife, Stirling, Clacks, West Lothian, you know, and we're sitting mid-table there. So there's, you know, there's no increase proposed, but we're sitting in a much better position than what we were last year, and the trade have been quite happy with how that has gone. So I hope members are able to agree to both, and as I say, I'm happy to answer questions in the detail. I'm sure Brian also would be able to Brian's superior knowledge on the technical aspects of these things. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Murtagh. Okay, is there any questions around in relation to the recommendations from the Policy Development Panel for Councillor Murtagh as convener? Councillor Reid?
I served on a PDP on taxes, and this is an interim report on other PDP on taxes, which will have a final report on the PDP on taxes. It must be the most examined part of the council, and in fact it's a bit like Dombey and Son. I don't think it'll ever end. But when will matters be brought to a conclusion, and we'll see that things been looked at inside out, upside down, and backwards, forwards.
Okay, Councillor Murtagh, when do you expect the Policy Development Panel on the whole work around the taxes to conclude?
You mean I won't just continue to review every aspect of taxi policy until we got to the conclusion? We agreed we did a scoping at the beginning of our you know, concept of what we were going to look at, and we agreed a number of items. The taxi tariff was one of them. Medicals was obviously a critical one that we had to look at. The next item which we're going on, which we've had our scoping meeting on, and officers are away to do research and prepare, is about the composition of the fleet. And again, you know, it's important that we have the information, and you know, we have set a timetable in place. But at the end of the day, if we have to go back and reconsult and come back, I'm prepared to get that information, to get it right, to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where we're having to review things every 5 years, or you know. So we had that will be the main body of what's consulted on next. We will be looking at a few other aspects which we had agreed to kind of wrap up around. There's various training aspects, or you know, ways of operation of the trade, and there's things contained within the technical specification which include moves about new technology, whether that's GPS metering, whether it's you know, how the new, obviously the changes in vehicle specification are evolving. So those will require probably consultation back with government and other bodies to understand what the direction of travel is, and how this technology, how we can future-proof any proposals that come forward. So I think it's really important that we get that right, and we spend the time to do that. I can't give you it will definitely finish at this point, but that is the next thing that we're looking at reporting on, and hopefully we'll probably be bringing that forward, I think, early in the new year, or before if possible, if we do get the consultation responses back, and we can bring it in the autumn.
Okay, Councillor, it appears that this is going to be an ongoing iterative process.
It's Dombey and Son. It will go on ad infinitum, I think, by the sound of things.
Okay, Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Convener. Just to say I'm happy to support the recommendations held within the report, and second my colleague, Councillor Murtagh.
Unfortunately, Councillor Murtagh is not a member of the committee, so I need to ask for a formal moving.
That's fine then.
I've always believed that policy development panels give the opportunity opportunity for members to discuss matters in an in-depth manner, to distill views and collaboratively agree on imaginative solutions to identified problems. We should also recognise the hard work put into reports by officers. Without research and the collation of information, the panel would not have been able to be insightful and make studied recommendations. I would commend the recommendations of the Policy Development Panel as set out in Agenda Item 6, Review of Taxi Policies, Interim Report on page 60, with reference to the recommendations as set out in 2.1. I would also commend to committee the recommendations as set out in Agenda Item 7, Review of Taxi Fare Scales and Other Charges as set out on page 69 under 2.1. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hughes.
In that case, happy to second my colleague, Councillor Hughes.
You were just a wee bit premature, but thank you for that. And we will look forward to seeing the further reports around the taxi trade and modernising the taxi trade, which I think is what you're actually trying to do coming forward. So thank you, Councillor Murtagh. For us, we move to item 7, and the recommendation there is to agree no change for the tariff for this year. Having just approved an annual review, are we content with the recommendations around that? Councillor Nimmo?
Just a question, Convener. As part of licensing, the taxi service is supposed to be self-sustaining, I believe. Are we currently bringing in enough money to cover ourselves, or is there a shortfall?
Okay, Mr. Moody?
Within the civic licensing taxi area, yes, broadly, the fees which come in cover the cost of providing the service. The same isn't the case for the liquor licensing part of the service, but we have less control in that area because the fees are largely prescribed at a governmental level, and in a large part they don't cover the cost of providing some of the service, and that's particularly in the case of occasional licenses where the fee has been £10 for a number of years. But the good news is that the government are currently consulting on increasing the fees for occasional licenses, and last week the licensing board agreed a consultation response to that consultation process, suggesting a tiered approach to those particular fees, and recognising that it would be better to have a smaller fee for some smaller community events, but for larger events where at the moment they would pay £10 licence for an event that causes a lot of work, there should be a higher fee for that. So that situation may improve as time goes on.
Okay, now Colin, it might just be a play on words, but you said broadly. Is that a yes or a no?
I think for the taxi licensing situation, it's a yes.
Okay, thanks for that.
Councillor Murtagh, do you wish to add anything?
I was just to input that in relation to the whole item here and more of the previous item, that was why it was so critical that we both have a legal obligation to maintain a viable trade for the district, but we also have obviously the obligation of to make sure that the costs are covered. If we require something, which is what we decided at Group 2, we did require it, we must pay the cost of that as a local authority, and that's why our research and our consultation had to be very clear in balancing out making sure that it was affordable and making sure that it would cover its costs, and that's probably why it took longer than anticipated to make sure these proposals were robust and well balanced to come back and cover, to make sure those two things were covered. So it was important.
Okay, thank you for that. Are we happy to agree item 7? Okay, now we have the corporate risk management update. Stuart, you're going to take?
Yes, thank you. Convener, the executive agreed our current corporate risk management policy and framework in May last year. The role of the executive in relation to risk management is set out in section 4.1 of the report, and in addition to reports coming to this committee, there are 6 monthly progress updates submitted to Audit Committee, the last of which was considered by Audit Committee in April of this year, in addition to member scrutiny. Their regular reports come to the Council's corporate management team for consideration. In revising our corporate risk register, we've taken the opportunity to review how we structure our risks. So risks have been restructured now into corporate risks affecting the whole council and service risks, so that at the highest level we have the opportunity to focus on the corporate high risks facing the council. Most risks haven't changed since last year because of their nature. They are long-term risks which have been identified. The biggest change is in relation to the inclusion of risk around Brexit, so that's been added since last year. Finally, risk management training is planned for Audit Committee, and members of the executive would be invited to attend that training as well, just reflecting the fact that both of these forums have responsibility for risk management. Recommendations can be now set out in section 2 of the report.
Thank you, Stuart. We're pleased to advise we now have an independent chair in place from the Audit Committee, and she is in the position of reviewing the Audit Committee work plan, and indeed there is a risk audit training going to be carried out in August, and a number of areas to be looked at, just about risk appetite, risk tolerance, and a number of other areas to be looked at in more detail. So we may well make recommendations from the Audit Committee in future around the corporate risk register, and that just gives to give members an assurance that the risks are being monitored very closely and will be looked at in greater detail, particularly as we go into medium-term financial planning. Councillor Bowes, do you want to?
Yeah, the risks in the council are one of the most important things we actually look at. I'll not repeat Stuart's items on the scrutiny of it, because he's covered that quite extensively. And on the actual risk assessments which are shown, as much as the overall report's good, I would have probably preferred to see the explanation of the coloured block at the start, so that when you read down it, you're actually picking that up. But in page 97, there is a good explanation of it and how the numbers actually work. Risk is I think the definition of risk is the potential of any hazard causing harm, and that's what we're looking at here. If you look at each of the risk assessments, it gives you consequences, mitigation actions, and a number of them. It also gives you the amount of assurance that's going through them. But as I say, if you go down to 97, it'll explain better to you exactly what they mean. And then if you work up, I think the first one, which has obviously just been added, is actually Brexit itself, and it shows you the amount of work. If you look at the movement that's looking to happen on that is having to be done to mitigate that situation, and I'll happily second the report.
Okay, any member got any questions or comments? Councillor Reid.
Page 87. It's about the mitigation of welfare reform and poverty. The third paragraph on the risk statement says significant work is required within a tight scale to implement the central hub and exit from Calendar Square. This is being closely monitored. Rumours abound that we're not going to leave Calendar Square, is that correct?
My understanding that there has been a delay with the library, and as a result there is no plans to move immediately from Calendar Square, but I don't know whether the lease has been extended for any more than 6 months. The lease has been extended. 6 months. So perhaps it would be useful to get an update for members on what's happening there. So it has been a little while since of being provided with an update.
I think there was a remark on the council website, you know, they have little bits at the beginning, little snippets. I think it was kind of misleading that sounded as though Calendar Square was going to be permanently the hub.
I know that there has been a refresh of it to make it look similar style to the other hubs, so that it has that similar feel, and indeed the type of service that is provided in the other hubs. But I think there has been a delay with regard to the proposals of the location of the library. But I haven't had an update other than that it was extended for 6 months to accommodate that. But we'll get members' information.
I think it was a combination of the note on the council website and kind of modernising of Calendar Square that led people to think that way. So thank you for that. Community planning is there's quite a few risks there. That's page. In general terms, it's failure to undertake proper engagement with service users, stakeholders and partners. The recent article in the Falkirk Herald regarding the community hospital, it would seem to suggest that there's not been that in the past. The new hospital was built 2010, and here 9 years later, the partners are looking at the future use of it. And remember the consultation exercise and when where the hospital was to be started in 2003. So has somebody any idea what's happening out there?
The community hospital and the running and management of the community hospital comes under the scope and jurisdiction of the Integrated Joint Board. And while there's a desire within the health NHS Forth Valley to look at rationalising some of their assets and modernising facilities, there needs to be a conversation had with colleagues within the IGIB about the future of the community hospital services. And there already has been an indication that we would want to look to modernise those services and perhaps bring some of those services within our town centre as part of revitalising the town centre, so that there's ongoing dialogue in relation to that and what we would need to do by way of consultation, particularly with the service users and their families about what a new type of community hospital type facility would be and what it would deliver.
Just as a taxpayer and a member of the public, I view the NHS as property, we have property, DWP has property, all paid for by the public. And yet, for accounting purposes, you have to buy and sell. It just seems that should be simplified somehow.
I think there's an aspiration by NHS Forth Valley to do something around the community hospital, but what that is needs to be discussed in a wider forum, and you're absolutely correct that the communities need to be able to engage within that process.
I would suggest it's 10 years late.
An
aspiration to discuss.
Well, I don't think we will be looking to discuss it for 10 years because, as I indicated, we would like to see some of the healthcare facilities provided within our town centre, and as part of that programme we would be actively looking to engage with our colleagues in health about how we're going to go about doing that, and we can't wait 10 years for that to happen.
I think in fairness the subject of the site does come up in the minutes quite regularly.
Absolutely.
It's just the fact there's at last some direction.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Alexander.
Yes, I was council's representative on the health board at the time for the consultation exercise in 2003. It was always felt that there would have to be a facility within Stirling because the perception was that Stirling had lost that particular debate and lost that argument. The project that was developed alongside the Stirling Community Hospital project was for Falkirk, and that was to be partially self-funding through the sale of various parts of the land round about Falkirk Infirmary. And what happened after 2007, I don't know. I resigned in 2007 over the aspect of the PFI involvement in Larbert. But that may be a factor in the considerations that came subsequent to that, with in particular, with the lack of ability to long-term future plan, with the availability of capital from whatever source was a factor. But perhaps again, it's maybe something that we could bring back through Alison, who's the current representative on the board, and you know, perhaps she could shed some light on these aspects. She's not a member of this committee, but I think we do need to find a way of reporting back from such as NHS Forth Valley, any other outside body that we serve on, as individuals or as representatives of the council, and this might be a good one to start with.
The Mr. Moody just reminded me that the minutes of the outside bodies are contained with the volume minutes for council, and therefore there's their ability to ask questions. The matter of the intermediate care facility and Falkirk Community Hospital was discussed at the Integrated Joint Board, and they are actively looking to pursue both as by way of you know, further details and reports. So certainly there's an opportunity there for members to ask questions.
That's true, Convener, and the issue of the availability of minutes is welcome, but if the minutes don't tell you what the discussion was, you know, they don't tell you what we discussed when you're having a coffee during the break, and you can often pick up more information then than you can during the formal sessions. So the minutes only record the outcome, and while outcomes are important, then you know we can get intelligence from conversations.
I will ask that the Chief Officer include a bit about the community hospital in her next update report to Council as well. I think members might find that helpful, and at that time there may be more of a story to be able to tell in relation to that and a direction. Okay, any other member? Are we happy to approve the corporate risk register? Okay, okay. Item 9 is the local housing strategy 2017 to 2022. Stuart?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I'm pleased to say I've got Karen Strang along with me this morning. Karen's the architect of our local housing strategy, so I'd like to start off by thanking Karen and the team for all the hard work that they've been doing over the course of the last 12 months or so to implement what our plans were when we started off the submission of the strategy. So our local housing strategy was approved by the executive in August 2017. It wasn't signed off by government until March of last year. So this is the first opportunity that members have had to receive an update on the plan associated with the strategy that was signed off in 2017. The figures shown are for 2017-18, but there's some contextual information which is a bit more up to date where that's available to us. There are 43 actions which underpin the strategy, and a summary of where we are in delivering on these 43 actions is shown in the table at 3.2 of the report, and the detail of these 43 actions is shown in the appendix. The 43 actions are spread over 6 priorities, and you can see a brief summary of each of the 6 priorities shown in section 4 of the report. We've also taken the opportunity to update our scheme of assistance, and there are no major changes to that scheme of assistance, and similar to what we did when we started off the agenda looking at the 2 HR policies, we've taken the opportunity to write our scheme of assistance in plain English, put in hyperlinks and put in named individuals, hopefully to make that of greater assistance to those who are reading our scheme of assistance. The recommendations convener are set out in section 2 of the report. We're happy to answer any questions that members have.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. This is the first update of our local housing strategy, which was approved in August 2017. This is a comprehensive document covering 6 key priorities and 43 actions. The strength of this document is demonstrated through the breadth of its content, the depth of information highlighted, the detailed projects, the extent of collaborative working, whether that be through agencies, registered social landlords, or the Scottish Government, and the work of the tenants and residents groups. But most importantly, within each of the key priorities, we must recognise that the driving force towards excellence is our staff, and without their determination to succeed, Falkirk Council would not be recognised nationally as a key performer. I just want to add in a couple of points in terms of contextualising. Under 4.1, on St Andrew's Day, staff from Housing Services were delighted to act as hosts to a delegation of Chinese officials visiting our country from the province of Guangdong. This province is the 3rd largest in China, with over 105 million people. The delegates included senior civil servants and senior bankers who had expressed an interest in the history of social housing, current housing policy, and how government financially supports the provision of housing. The event was held in Carnvale House. I felt privileged to be a speaker at this event. I've also viewed new build housing at Shield Gardens Langleys and Graham Place Denny. I've heard nothing but positive feedback from tenants. In relation to collaborative working under 4.2, I was invited by Link Housing to their sod cutting event for their new retirement living development at Williamson Street in Falkirk. I was also invited by Weslow Housing to their official opening of the Silk House in Park Street, Falkirk. The official opening was carried out by Kevin Stewart, MSP, Minister for Local Government, Housing and Planning. Under 4.4, you have noted the work of the Council's empty homes officers. I have also to report that staff were recently invited to provide evidence in the Scottish Parliament to the Local Government and Communities Committee's inquiry into empty homes. With reference to 4.15, I have attended resident and tenant forum meetings. I have also met with members of the editorial panel, the scrutiny panel, the Housing Asset and Management Group. I have also attended the volunteer awards ceremony. This report also highlights the development of a young person's plan and the work of the Housing Contribution Statement Steering Group, chaired by Housing Services in support of vulnerable groups. We should note that 91.13% of our properties met the energy efficiency standard for Scottish social housing. We should also note that the percentage of our properties meeting the Scottish Housing Quality Standard was 97.28%. This report is an exemplar of good practice, and we should be proud of the ambition and the success which exudes from every page, which in turn highlights the immense progress which has been delivered to date. I commend the recommendations as set out in 2.1 of the report to the Executive Committee.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hughes. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Convener. I'm happy to support the recommendations held within the report, and I'm more than happy to support my colleague, or second my colleague, who's put it very eloquently, very in words, as they always do. So happy to second.
Thank you. Could I just make comment with regard to the scheme of assistance? I think that has been very much simplified. I think I welcome that, partly because it's a good guide for the vulnerable people that may well require adaptations carried out within their own home. And I was just wondering if it was going to be produced as an easy guide that can be shared with homeowners at that particular moment when they need that type of facility. Yeah. Okay. Any questions, members, comments? Councillor Reid?
Without wishing to diminish the role of the current convener, I think it would be remiss not to mention his predecessor, who formulated quite a bit of this plan. He had his faults, like we all do, but he was certainly full of ideas. And I think generally the housing plan has received unanimous support as it's worked it through various administrations with very little political differences, to be honest. Is there a significance in the colours, the red, yellow, red, amber and green, sorry.
Yeah. Did you forget how to go there?
No, I got yellow and amber
It's
together.
It's to match with the
actions.
The colours, yeah, that are in the actions in table 3.2.
Okay. If I could ask about on 112, it's a reference to Williamson Street, which is, of course, is to be recommended, not least for stimulating the town centre. And I think we'll have several hundred applications for these houses. But it says ongoing concerns expressed by developing landlords around developer contributions. Is that a general statement, or is that pertinent to the Williamson Street site?
Mrs. Guys, are you able to assist with that?
I don't know the detail of these discussions, but and I don't know whether my colleagues can assist with this particular case. But I do know that there have been representations made previously by landlords from the RSL sector in relation to development plan contributions, Section 75 contributions. Obviously, in many cases, the delivery of this social housing can be marginal because it's so linked to funding that comes from central government, and additional contributions for planning gain can sometimes cause issues. Notwithstanding that, these are deficiencies that are created by the development, and in terms of the planning rules, a contribution requires to be sought, although we do have capacity to look at viability of projects as part of that exercise, as you know. So in general terms, that's a general reply, but as I say, I'm not familiar with the specifics relating to Williamson Street.
Perhaps you could, if you could maybe find out if there are specifics on this particular matter that need to be give further consideration.
Of course, there could be education consequences, but I'm trying to think in a town centre setting it would be rather different from something in the countryside. And apart from education, it's difficult to think of what other deficiencies
and there
could be.
And there may well be
maybe sewage or something
around contributions to health.
And health.
That's yeah.
Open,
I think parking, from memory, parking was an issue in relation to this particular site.
Of course, that's helpful. I've got 121 and 122, but I don't know what it was. So. Sorry to hold things up. It was it's about the young people leaving care. I think I would offer my thanks to Councillor Gardner and yourself in particular with their work through the Champions Board and pushing this up the agenda. How's that working? Do we have any feedback as to improvements or anything?
My understanding that the young people are much happier with the protocols, and particularly around the on-call for support. But I think the development of the facility in Gary Place, which has been an excellent example of a co-production model and design, the young people are very, very proud of, and they're looking forward to that being completed. And I think that should be available for members to go and see, should they wish to do so, towards the end of the summer, and indeed start to see how our young people will be identified for going into that almost intermediate facility, where they can go and have their own independent home but still have the support on site in order to build their confidence and skills around learning to live lives independently and have the responsibilities of home ownership or tenancy. But I think that's been a really, really good opportunity to work with young people and get to know them, get to know the difficulties that they experience.
I think the inclusion of Kenny Gillespie on the board has been...
Yes,
indeed. In direct contact with the guy who gets things moving. There's a reference to, in 122, the tenant scrutiny panel highlighting that housing with Care 3 was not suitable for all dwellings. I'm not quite sure what... Well, I do know what it means, but I don't know how many properties would be involved and would have to have the category changed.
I don't know whether you'd be able to have the detail around that housing with Care 3 changes.
The scrutiny panel went out when allocations were being made, and they made comment on properties which had external stairs. They were properties which are in Denny. And they queried why were these classed as housing with Care 3. And that's why we've gone back and we've looked at it and agreed that housing with Care 3 will be the properties which have level access or maybe a couple of stairs or ground floor.
I think I came across such a case, strangely enough, in Denny. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other member? Are we happy to agree the report? Okay, now we have a suite of financial reports. The first one being the provisional financial position. Mr. Smale.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, this is the first of 3 interrelated reports dealing with the year-end financial position, all of which are subject to audit. So, in terms of the financial outturn, dealing first with the general fund, you can see at the bottom of the first page that the outturn position was some 800,000 above budget, but in relative or percentage terms, that's only a fraction of 1%. Obviously, that's the aggregate position, and sitting beneath it are a series of ebbs and flows, overs and unders that yield that aggregate position, and that's dealt with in the next section, para 413. Just picking out some of the elements there. The most significant is children's services. You can see that's the first one listed there, where, bearing in mind it's a very large budget, over budget by just under 2 million, but that was significantly mitigated by a transfer from the DSM reserve. The largest element in that relates to the social work overspend, and you'll be aware of that from previous reports throughout the year, and also the significant remedial closer to home strategy that's been devised to tackle that, albeit that will take time for the benefits to flow through. So I think we would anticipate in the current financial year still seeing pressures coming from that source. In terms of development services, relatively small net sum over budget. Clearly, you know the history in terms of the waste element of that and the remedial action in terms of the new waste charter compliant recycling which is in place. Insofar as corporate housing services go, I think the main element there to be aware of is the underspend due to staff savings in the central support services. Capital financing costs are under, and part of that's attributable, as you'll see in the relevant paragraph there, to the Treasury activity that were flagged up in other reports and indeed appears in the suite of 3 reports before you this morning. We, at para 414, touch on the integration joint board, noting that it's very much the board's own responsibility to manage the budget but a small underspend noted there that will be carried forward in their reserve. Section 4.3 picks up in various workforce metrics. You can see in the tables there data on redeployment, voluntary severance and staff numbers, both in headcount and FTE terms. So in 4.4 we turn to the HRA. Overall, the spend is in line with budget. And that's the main thing to note there. That takes us on in section 4.5 to the various reserves. The first one and the main one is the general fund reserve, and as reflected in the position set out in Appendix 1, there's an overall balance for the year of just over 11 million, but as you'll recall in the February budget, 1 million of that was earmarked to cover savings, budget savings from the trust until such time as they were delivered. The next element under reserves is the repairs and renewals fund at 454, and as you can see from the various paragraphs there, that comprises an array of various service elements, and there's a narrative giving you an overview of the position, and that then takes us on 455 to the various earmarked reserves, and again the balances and an overview narrative is provided for each of those. So just jumping back to the to the recommendations at the front end of the report, you can see the recommendations set out in 2.1, convener.
Thank you, Mr. Snail. And I know that there's been a lot of work being put together to bring together the final audit accounts ready to go to audit. And I would thank you all for the work in doing that, and your team for getting us to this position. I would also just to thank you for keeping us very much on track during the year financially, and the outturn has been pretty much as predicted, and that has had to take a lot of financial governance and oversight, particularly in areas within our children's services in particular, where there has been significant pressures, and that's obviously not going to disappear over the next year, but there is a programme there in order to look to mitigate that as we move forward, as is our longer term planning approach. So I don't think there's much more that I wish to say in relation to that, other than we know where we stand. We have a programme going forward with proposals towards managing our financial plans over the next 5 years, and members will be asked very soon to go back into that budget process and start to give some further direction on how we deliver on that. Councillor Bowes?
Again, at this time of year, the financial reports we tend to get are the looking back ones, and come the autumn we'll be more looking at the current and going forward. And yeah, it's been covered to a point on the children's services social work overspent. However, we've got to remember at a certain point during the year that overspend was looked at as being 3.25 million, and with a lot of hard work that has been helped the situation. And that the question on it is why. Well, the money had to be spent because it was for some of our most vulnerable children. There was some special secure care that had to be purchased, and obviously then it's a positive thing that the financial support for 18 to 26 has increased up to 18 to 26-year-old, but again that adds amount of pressure. I welcome very much, and I think it's been covered actually partly in the previous report, is the work on the closer to home strategy, as Councillor Reid had covered. And again, you've got to say thank you to the services, particularly in education and children's services, and housing, for moving things forward really quickly. And a special mention is it already has been, not you were stealing my thunder, but to Kenny for the hard work that he's done. When you look through, going through and actually into the figures, the reserve figures are within the reserve policy range. However, and it's not like you, Brian, but you've got your usual note of caution in there that there is potential pressures on that, and I thought you would have raised that, and it's not like you not to miss a caution point to put in, but people have to remember that these things are always there on these figures. One of the things that I noticed this year in particular was the net expenditure. 17-18 we spent, and I'll just give the top line number, 330 million. Our net expenditure for 18-19 was 340 million, which is another £10 million additional spend in the council services during the year. So with that, I happily second this report and the recommendations in it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bowes. Any questions from members? Councillor Nimmo?
Thanks, Convener. Just on the issue of the children's social work, again, it's worthwhile mentioning that the overspend's only been reduced by 155,000 in the last 6 months, so there's still a long way to go with this. The new duties that are stemming from the Children and Young People Act. Now, we're going to have to look after our young people between the ages of 18 and 26 now, and that's going to have a significant burden on our budget. That's an additional 8 years that we're going to have to provide care packages of some nature for our young people. I'm just wondering what would be the ongoing budget implications and what are the figures for the young people between these two ages? How many kids are we actually dealing with, Robert?
It's not impossible to say, but it's difficult to say. Some children, when they get to 18, even though they're entitled to support till 21, won't want it and they'll just disappear. Some will want to stay where they are until they're 21. So if a child's in a foster care placement, they now have the right to stay in that foster care placement until they're 21. And we then have a duty of continued support from 21 to 26. Now, depending on the individual journey of the child, they will be making decisions as they go through that process. So, I mean, it's not the case that all of our children that are currently in care will need to have the same level of money spent on them forever, but some of them will. And we've already mentioned what's happening in Gary Place. The idea of Gary Place is that children might either leave a care home or a foster care placement, and they would transition through Gary Place into ultimately their own accommodation. So the costs in all of these circumstances would be going down and down. So to answer your question and say what is the overall financial burden, it's really quite difficult, and to a degree it depends on the success that we have in supporting young people into work and supporting them into sustained independent living. Now, the better we are at that, then the lower our costs will be. But the change in the legislative background does mean that children have a right to get support from the council for far longer than ever before. In terms of numbers, at any one time, we've got somewhere between 100 and 150 children in external care placements. So if you take that over the piece, we've probably got a dozen or so that are passing the 18 threshold every year. So 10 years from now, that number could be 120 kids that are on that journey through to 26.
Okay, Councillor Alexander.
Yeah, the issue of looked after children is an important one. I would certainly argue very strongly that the longer the child remains within a stable environment, the less likely they are to become involved with criminal justice. For example, so I think the the steps have been taken by the government in changing the regulations. Excuse me, frog's back again. The changing the regulations to ensure that there's continuity. Should that be the priority of the child, the young person, certainly not a child at 16. But that would give, I think, that stability, and we see the benefit in criminal justice. We see the benefit in employment. You and I were present at the Forth Valley Royal last week, where the latest group of youngsters coming through the year-long placement there, with 70% going on to employment. It was a fantastic achievement, and it shows the determination, and it shows the joint working between NHS Forth Valley, our employment training unit, and the government, and it really was something to behold. There were tears among some of the parents, and these are kids that chances are would have been lost, or some of them have been lost in the system somewhere through unemployment, through the lack of opportunities. So I think that there was a good news story there. Just like there's a number of good news stories within this authority that really we need to promote more, because it's important that the youngsters in particular know that there's support for them. They know that there's opportunities for them if they only want to take them, and that's our responsibility. But certainly in terms of the costs and savings, then I think there's a significant amount to be made from keeping our youngsters away from criminal justice through offering them stability, employment and hope.
Thank you for that. Just as a corporate parent, we have a duty of care to those youngsters that are in our care, and giving them a stable home life for as long as possible is the right thing to do, and enable them to maximise their life chances. And I think that is the ethos of the continuing care, and giving people that opportunity. As Robert said, not everybody will want to take that opportunity, and we will look to have to support them in other ways, whether that be through support through housing, but at least giving them the opportunity to maintain a stable home environment is something that will indeed allow them to mature. So often some of these young people may well be an age of 16 or 18, but through the experience they've had, they may have not had that ability to mature and be able to build up all the skills you would normally expect children of 16 or 18 to have done. Is there any other questions, Councillor Coombs?
Thanks, Convener. It's page 158, item 4.14. As always with Brian's report, I read it and then I think, what is he actually meaning here? It's like double speak as far as I'm concerned, but I use that term not as I used it in our previous executive, but as a positive here. It's like X, Y and Z, albeit it's bad but it's good, and it's good but it's bad. It was the issue around, as I say, the underspend, although we've got a rising demand, and I just wondered if you could elaborate further on either the positives or the negatives of that particular item around home care.
Recognising I'm not equipped to speak authoritatively on the underlying service issues there, but from a financial point of view, given the size of the budget, to come in that close to budget, I think is commendable, and I think we've got to relate that to the position on the other side of the IJB's budget in terms of the health position, where there's a significant overspend. So there are challenges in the round for the IJB to deal with. And they are significant challenges. But in terms of the adult care side of the house, it's the position is their budget is, to all intents and purposes, being managed consistent with the funds that the council has passed across to them.
The underspend you refer to in 4.1.4 is actually housing money that's been underspent. It's not in home care. 128,000. That's actually earmarked to housing.
Under the IJB?
Yes.
Is this about the grass cutting then? What part of the housing is
no,
in the
it's
IJB?
aids and adaptations.
Yes.
So grass cut and garden aid is in there, but so is aids and adaptations as well.
Okay, I'm just not sure that I agree with Brian that an underspend in that respect is commendable. Certainly not for the people that are desperately waiting for aids and adaptations. Who could tell me then a bit more about the working group?
Which working group are you referring to?
It says there a working group was tasked with reviewing the home care services.
That's within the IJB.
So is there any elected member on it?
The convener may well be involved, in Councillor Colley, and I know I'm not involved, but there is a working group tasked. There is a complete. There was actually contained, I think, within the last update that the Chief Officer gave about the changes to the home care service under the locality planning.
Okay, I'm aware that there is a rise in demand, and I know that there are also staff concerns over the home care service, and I just wanted to raise that. Okay, thanks.
Your best, my suggestion was either contact the convener or perhaps Joe McElhone. We'll be able to give you more details around that. 19th of July. Yeah. Okay, any other questions in relation to the paper? Okay, happy to agree. Okay, move on to the capital programme. Brian?
Yes, picking up on the general fund firstly, in section 4.1, and you can see the table at the bottom of that first page, the final overview position. Later in the report we'll come on to a breakdown and explanation as to what sits behind that. The next section, 4.1.2, as you'll see, just takes each of the council's service areas and in the bullets gives you a summary of the major projects and their position. In 4.2 we turn our attention to resources, and it will be evident that by far the major element for the general fund in any case is Scottish Government capital grant at just under 14 million. So in section 4.3, just exploring the variance in a bit more depth, the first table there at 4.3.1 breaks down that 9.2 million shown in the first page, and then in the table, in the little table in the following paragraph, 4.3.2, focuses on the movement since February when we last reported. There's a few projects that underspend at 4.3.4, and if I can just draw your attention to the mention of the Falkirk High Station car park, where the service are proposing that the savings there be carried forward to accommodate further parking spaces, and that's picked up in the recommendations, which we'll come back to. The next section, 4.3.5, sets out the areas where there's been further slippage since the position reported in February, and it will be evident from the table therein that while there's a large number of examples, they're all relatively small, aggregating to just under 1.6 million. And the final table in that section at 4.3.7, just noting previously agreed rescheduled projects. So we then turn on in 4.5 to the HRA, the Housing Capital Programme, noting there that that was just over 3.2 million under the budget, and the table at the top of the next page just showing you the movement from the position reported in February. And the narrative thereafter from 453 onwards just takes each of those elements in the table and gives you a bit of further information on their status. And similar to the general fund section, at 4.6 we pick up on the various resources, government grant also, CFCR, but borrowing is much more of a significant element in the mix there for HRA. We're required to produce a series of prudential indicators to give comfort that the capital programme's prudent, affordable and sustainable, and the suite of these are set out in Appendix 4. In Section 4.8, just reinforcing the very strong linkage between the capital programme and Treasury management, which we'll come on to in a sec, and the table at 4.8.1 is indeed mirrored in that Treasury report, very much reflecting that point. We then move on to the two reserves in Section 4.9. The first one's capital receipts, which as the name suggests is sale of land and buildings, and the other one is grants, and that's essentially Section 75 grants. At 4.10 we provide something of a wrap-up of the NHI initiative, which was a legacy of the post-financial crisis and an attempt to inject capital expenditure into the economy. As part of that deal, the Council provided a loan, and at the conclusion of the deal, which is where we are now, that loan has now been repaid, so that deal is closed. And if I can just take you back to the recommendations at Section 2, most of them asking you to note the position, but as I highlighted as I was going through the report, recommendation 2 specifically mentions the car parking spaces at Falkirk High Station. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Brian. It's a significant capital programme, and it's straddled over 3 years. Therefore, we are committed to making sure that these projects are taken forward. There's been a lot of work done this year, particularly to address the difficulties with slippage, and you would always anticipate that with some the capital programme there's always going to be some projects that there will be some slippage, but I think there's been a significant improvement in the monitoring and ongoing of that, and we now just need to sustain that. I think the capital programme is gaining some traction, and the fact that we've brought in projects under budget is credit to the monitoring process. So I'm happy to move the recommendations as in Section 2. Councillor Bowes.
Yeah, as the leader has said, there has obviously been some slippage, but I think one of the important things, I think it was earlier this year, that Brian had put in that they're very much looking to manage the slippage a lot better and put project managers, I think, to be so that you tighten up on the potential of slippage. It's obviously too early to see any results for that because it's only just being implemented, but I think that's an important move as the council moves forward. The detail in the slippage covers, and they all seem to be reasonable reasons for what has actually happened. Section 75, I see it's unallocated. I think that's particularly for obviously projects that have still to well, some of it's projects to go ahead, some of it's where they've still got to plan, because this project's obviously to move forward as the years go on. When you come down to actual borrowing itself, one of the things that one of the questions that was given is if we're actually borrowing 362 million, how close are we? Well, we're actually reasonably far away from our authorised limit. Our authorised limit is 425 million, so we're relatively comfortable within that zone. So yeah, like I think there was last year, the amount of slippage, and I understand that it's quite normally an amount of slippage in the capital. But I think an important point, very important point, is that we're looking to manage that going forward to hopefully reduce the potential of slippage. And with that, I happily second this report.
Okay, thank you. Open up to members. Councillor Reid.
It probably is agreed. I'm just asking questions of interest. The car park at the station, I take it that's the new one to the south of the station. How many extra spaces will we get, or is that a bit premature to ask that? 18. Oh, that's good. That gets a constituent off my back.
Because he's now got a parking space at the station.
Yeah. Page 174, the grandstand toilets and the play area toilet. I know these are community trust matters, but at the time was the question of changing places thought about perhaps being added to the project, or is there no one to answer that?
I don't know about the technical nature of the athletic grandstand toilets. I don't think that was a creation of a new toilet. I think it was existing.
No, it's pretty grotty. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know that the trust, like the council, are looking to introduce changing places toilets wherever possible, and I know that they're looking at the possibility of including one at the Helix. It may well be that this wasn't suitable for that. Yeah. Obviously, it's quite difficult to retrofit these facilities in some cases, but I know that they are keen to integrate these into their facilities wherever they can. So if this wasn't included, it was for good technical reason.
Mm-hmm. There's a Calendar Park one in particular, with it being adjacent to a play area, obviously. And we just had the announcement today of an extra 200k going in for this Roman theme play area. Mm-hmm. I just wondered if we could have squeezed out a little bit more for a changing places toilet, because the toilets in Calendar Park are quite spacious actually.
I would agree, but I wasn't aware that the trust were looking to do any particular work around the toilets there, but there's obviously there's an opportunity there to look at that.
If we put in a new, almost a brand new play park, okay, thank you. The other one was 175. That was the new energy improvements at the High Flats. As we all know, that's to be accompanied by new lifts going in as well, so it's going to be a period of some turmoil, but it was to complement the housing staff on the way they're approaching this, and the amount of consultation that's taken place, and also the amount of information supplied to myself and Councillor Binney together. It's been quite exemplary. Mother Fitzsimmons in particular.
I understand they're going to be locating staff actually on site for the duration of the programme, which I think would be really helpful.
Yeah, it's a very good example of consultation. Just wish to say thank you to them. Thank you.
Okay, any other member, or are we happy to agree the report? Agreed. Okay, thank you. It's the jewel in the suite of the reports, the Treasury Management Annual Review.
It's indeed, Convener, a special treat for the committee. I'll go through this quickly. So, in section 4.1, there's just some data on the economic backcloth, maybe just plucking out there in the first few lines the marginal move in base rate from 0.5% up to 0.75%, change days indeed. In terms of the borrowing side, that's set out in section 4.2, and as we've heard already, very much geared to the capital programme spend. The table at the foot of that page, para 422, the last line there, you can see the long-term borrowing. And in the table in the subsequent paragraph 423, it just captures the movements since we last reported in February, and the subsequent paragraphs expand somewhat on the lines in that table by way of explanation. 429, another little table, maybe just drawing your attention to the figure in the bottom right-hand box, 260 million. So that's the total debt outstanding at that snapshot point in time. Maybe just noting, as we do at 4212, that we've availed ourselves of the further PWLB discount rate for certain eligible parts of capital spend, which obviously is helpful. Then 4.3, we turn to the investment strategy as opposed to the borrowing side of the house. And as you know from previous reports, the criteria we use there is very much geared to prudence. First of all, being focused on the security of any lending we pass out, then the liquidity, i.e. how quickly we can get it back, and only then do we turn to the third dimension, which is yield or return. And just again, a snapshot at 31st of March, we held 44 million in investments across a range of banks and other local authorities. As with capital, albeit less so in terms of number, there's a suite of prudential indicators and their Appendix 1. And picking up on a request that was made at a previous meeting, we incorporate some benchmarking data at 4.5, which is essentially showing the investment position as at 31st of March across Scottish local authorities. And as you'll see from the bar chart, we sit comfortably in the middle there. So back to the recommendations, asking you to note the report, and also consistent with the Treasury Management Code, it now needs to be referred on to June Council. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Brian, for that very succinct Treasury report that I think all of us could actually easily understand. I think our Treasury Management has served us well in managing our borrowing and indeed the investment to date, and in being able to maintain what was required to develop our capital programme, and it will indeed become much more of a control tool as we go forward, and the proposals that we've taken as part of our medium-term financial planning. So I thank you for doing that, and I feel that we have a robust strategy going forward. I'm happy to move the report. Councillor Bowes.
Yeah. Can I just say that, and thank you for the 3 reports, Brian. I was going to do it, but doing it 1, 2 and 3 would have been too much. There's a lot of work that your whole department are obviously putting in every year to all these reports. And yeah, the council very much are working on using plain English, and I think that makes the vast majority of these reports reasonably understandable. On this one, obviously the economic review is covering obviously UK figures, and another mention, I think that's a third today of the Brexit word as well. Going through it, and I don't really want to repeat myself because I was talking about the borrowing, where we are in borrowing, the previous one. I noticed the borrowing has gone down ever so slightly, which obviously means then we've got less to pay for, and I know you've been very prudent with paying off things where it is reasonable to do. So with that, and I say, and so that we don't keep on going on these, I'll happily second this report.
Okay, thank you. Is there any comments or questions in relation to Treasury Management? Councillor Reid.
I hate to let Mr Smale get away with putting up a report and not being questioned. It's a statement that appears, I think, in all 3 reports, and that was that Treasury Management activities were highlighted as an area which would be reviewed and restructured to secure future revenue budget savings. I thought that was always the case, but so what has policy changed in that regard?
This really is driven by a significant change in the regulations, and you may recall when we were dealing with the Treasury strategy for the current year, there was some reference at Council to the backcloth to this, and effectively there was a difference of interpretation of the regulations and the powers that gave local authorities between local authorities in unison through the Directors of Finance section and Audit Scotland. And there was something of an impasse there that would have materially inhibited councils harvesting the benefit that from their interpretation were derived from the change in regulations. The Cabinet Secretary at the time of the budget helpfully stepped in and offered to issue a clarifying amendment that would deliver what we always thought, or the councils thought, was one of the purposes of the change in the first place. So we were waiting for that to go through due process. But in the interim and fairly recently, Audit Scotland have revisited their position and agreed that actually the interpretation that the councils had was indeed soundly based, given that it was reinforced with heavyweight legal opinion, council opinion. So that matter has now been resolved. So that's, I think, a significant and important backcloth, and being unfettered to exploit the potential of the regulations in the business plan, 5-year business plan that was submitted to and indeed approved by Executive in May. There were very significant figures used to help balance the anticipated deficit going forward, something like 5 or 6 million derived from those Treasury activities. So this will be a very important activity going forward. The reports today reflect all three of them, because as I said at the outset, they're all interrelated, reflected $1 million that we've harvested or harnessed and used to pay down debt, which means obviously the repayments going forward are that much less than they would be, which inherently helps the revenue budget. But going forward, basically current year and the subsequent years in the medium-term financial plan / business plan, there are significant injections of Treasury savings built in, as I say, in aggregate, something in the order of 5 or 6 million. And as we look to mine those rich seams, we would hope going forward for the latter years of the business plan, there will be further scope to assist meeting the challenges of the projected deficits.
So it's a minimum of 5 to 6 million over 5 years.
Yeah.
It could be more.
It could be more, as we seek to, as I say, exploit the potential. So it's been a very welcome and healthy boost to meet what is a very challenging climate. It's not a panacea, it doesn't solve the position, but it's a very welcome help in meeting the challenge.
Creates a bit of that breathing space and flexibility.
It does indeed. It can do a lot with £6 million. Right, thank you.
Okay. Any further questions? Are we happy to approve the report? Okay. Town Centre update and capital fund. Mrs. Geisler.
Yes, the report before members this morning intends to do two things. It's update you on the work that's been undertaken by the Town Centre Working Group, the Falkirk Town Centre Working Group, and it also suggests allocations in relation to the funds that have recently been awarded to us or intimated to us by Scottish Government for Town Centre regeneration. Along with all other local authorities, we are acutely aware of the condition of and the challenges faced by town centres up and down the country, and that's causing some significant concern. In relation to the work that we've been undertaking in our area, the health check work we've done has identified that the areas, the town centres that need particular priority at the moment are Falkirk, Denny and Grangemouth. Insofar as the Denny one is getting attention at the moment, we have obviously redeveloped the site, phase 1 site. Members recently considered a report in respect of the phase 3 site, and plans for phase 2 are ongoing. So that's been covered elsewhere in projects. The Scottish Government have also intimated concern in relation to town centres. The town centres are changing very rapidly from what they were to what they will become, but we're not in a position to do this in any sort of measured way as has happened previously. So the Scottish Government has launched a 50 million capital fund earlier this year, specifically for town centre regeneration. That's been allocated around local authorities, and this council's share of that is not much shy of £2 million. However, this money is to be committed by March of 2020, which means that we'll have to be fairly quick off our feet to spend that. In relation to the Falkirk Town Centre work, members are aware of the working group that was established, the workshops that were undertaken to consider what might be the vision for the Falkirk Town Centre as our main town centre, and a working plan, and members considered that those proposals at your executive meeting in March. And since last reporting to you, that group has met again and has agreed to move to form the partnership model, which again was reported to members in March, and is known as Revitalising Falkirk. The terms of reference for this new group are attached as Appendix 1 to the report, and we're asking members today to consider those terms of reference and also to nominate 3 elected members to be part of that partnership. In relation to the allocation of the funds that I've mentioned, the areas that I mentioned already do need some input, and also in terms of vacancy rates, that an exercise that was undertaken recently, health check exercise, identified that Bowness should also be included in the list for attention to be received. As a consequence of that, my colleagues have looked at a number of projects within these 3 town centres that could be used to support this fund, the funding opportunity that we have here, and these are described in paragraph 4.4 of the report. I won't go through these in turn, but I would pick out just a few of them. I think there's an interesting opportunity for us here now to liaise with the work that Abelia and ScotRail have completed in respect of Falkirk High and Gravesend stations, their travel plans. I think that they have identified that there is work that they could be looking at to improve the accessibility and general attractiveness of these stations in relation to usage. So I think that's a useful opportunity for us to tie in with that work. In respect of Grangemouth, obviously there's a Making Places work that's been externally funded, which is ongoing in Grangemouth just now. That's been very well received within the community, a lot of community participation in that exercise. And the projects that we've identified in the Grangemouth list are those that are coming through from that exercise, particularly around demolition of long-standing assets which are no longer fit for purpose or able to be used. In Bowness, again, the issues that are coming forward from the community, both the communities of interest, both the community that live there and the traders within the town centre, relate to vacant properties, long-standing vacant properties. Now, these projects are very general in terms, and if members are content, we will work these into more detailed options, which we can report back to members with more details around costings at a future meeting. Paragraph 5 of the report makes reference to consultation. I've already touched on this. There obviously has been a significant amount of consultation undertaken in respect of framing the proposals that we have at the moment, and that will continue and will be a key element of the success of both the Revitalising Falkirk grouping and also the projects that we've mentioned in particular today. as I've already mentioned in respect of financial commitments, these monies are required to be committed during the financial year 1920. Without that happening, there is an expectation that the funding could be clawed back. So turning to the recommendations, Convener, as I've said, those relate to participation in the Revitalising Falkirk Partnership and seeking nominations for 3 elected members to sit on this new body, and also to support the approach to the delivery of the allocation of the funds as described in the report, with a view to reporting back to members after the recess with more detail around that.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Geisler. Councillor Alexander?
The welcome report, and particularly we welcome the additional resources that are coming west from Edinburgh to the local authority. Almost £2 million is not a great deal, but it's enough for us to start projects which are been outstanding for some considerable time, which will add value to our town centres. The issue of for example, Bowness, the reference to the library is an important one, because the rumour mill is circulating round about Bowness that we want to move the library out of the town centre. It makes no sense whatsoever to take that footfall from the library and take it out with the town centre. So this investment, which we see as a major priority, will help that process and develop a programme for allowing access, full access, disability access to the library facilities there. The Falkirk Town Centre Working Group is functioning and is going through a period of change at the moment as we move from the all-encompassing group of something like 16, 17 individuals to a smaller, much more manageable group, concentrating very much on the development side of it. I would nominate yourself, Convener, for one of the 3 positions, and perhaps the other 2 groups could give us their nominations as soon as possible as well. It is important that this is seen as being a partnership. That's why it's not good to have too many top-loaded politicians from local authority or officials from the authority. It's important we get that balance right, because there has to be room for those who will be players in this, and those who will hopefully participate within the guidelines that are there, and the need to bring together all of the various strands. That means that there has to be a second forum as well, or a second body as well, that will carry out the consultation works that are required. That aspect of it is missing from this particular paper, but will come forward in the fullness of time. At this point in time, it's important to get the development group off and running. The revitalisation of the town centre is something that I think is beginning to catch the imagination. We've had tremendous assistance from the Futures Trust representatives and from the architectural groups that have been and saw the challenge that we face, and are willing to participate and to work with us on dealing with these challenges. The timescale has been generally maintained. Slipped. Excuse me. Slipped slightly over the last few months, but not to the extent that it presents a major problem. It gives us more time, in fact, to attract partners and developers within that process. So with that, convener, move the recommendations to participate in the revitalised Falkirk Town Centre Partnership on the basis of terms of reference contained in Appendix 1 of the report, and as I've already nominated yourself for that particular body, convener. To participate in the Falkirk Town Centre Partnership, monitoring these elected members, 3 elected members for this new body. The 3, to approach the delivery of the Council's allocation of the Town Centre capital funds for 2019-20 as summarised in the report. 4, the officers proceed to finalise project delivery arrangements and cost for each of the priority projects as summarised in the report. And 5, to receive a further report on the progress of these proposals for a final decision. It is important that, as I say, that we have these costed as close to actual costing as possible, and we look forward to that coming back to the authority. If we could have the nominations from other parties, then I think there's a meeting due very shortly.
Can't remember, but there was a nominal date for the meeting, but I can't remember. It was after the recess, is my understanding.
Right.
Quite possibly August, before the executive in August, I think.
Okay. So with that, I'd formally move.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Alexander. Nigel?
Do you want a formal second first before I come in?
Happy saying.
Thank you.
Thanks. I just concur with David's summary of how welcome, albeit small, nearly £2 million will go to help in the number of areas. Really, just from the point of view of Bowness, and just to stress the concern that our local members in Bowness and the public do have with respect to the library, and as you say, the rumour mongers that's going around about it. It's certainly a building which represents the only building within the town centre itself where public can meet. It also has a small hub, I believe, of the social work department. And at the moment, really, the facilities are pretty primitive. Access to the upper level is by outside stairs, I believe, so it's not disabled friendly. And as far as the social work department is concerned, my understanding is that it's only separated from the main public area by some kind of removable partition, so they really don't have proper facilities. So clearly, again, if that's going to continue down there. So yes, strong support from our side for some money to be put in, particularly to the library and in Bowness, that local member and the community really realise how important that is to them.
Okay, thank you for that, Nigel. I think we have a town centre's first principle that we need to look to develop, and that includes all centres of our population. And just under £2 million isn't a lot of money, but it's enabling money wherever possible. My understanding is the proposals that are here have been through an element of scrutiny. First of all, the ones for Falkirk Town Centre, a lot of that was derived from the action plan from the working group. And that was where that was led from, and I think that there's a real opportunity in working with the station's travel plans to take advantage of what they can bring to the table and enable us to get a bit more for our buck in respect to that. Similarly, the work that's been going around locality planning and actions from the Making Places in Grangemouth have identified areas that they think that could actually act as a catalyst to further improvements, and indeed similarly in Bowness there. So I'm therefore looking to see if any further contributions do others want to nominate through their groups, or do they want to nominate today for the town centre partnership? Joan?
Just to nominate Councillor Reid from the Labour group for the...
Okay. Well, it's one from each of the three parties, so I think that's taken as read. Feel free, if you require to discuss within your group and feedback, Mr Moody will take the names.
I'm not sure whether our group leader has made a recommendation by email to... I did see
Not
a
so
copy.
Okay, right, okay.
I did see a copy of the email, but I don't know where it went to. But
Okay,
well.
right. Absolutely, okay. Is there any other? Councillor Reid?
I think with the, I'll state the obvious. I think it's important during this hiatus between the planning and the building appearing that the town centre be kept excited by. And the festival last week was a very good example. The high street was very busy, in fact. And it was quite a high class merchandise that was being provided. So I think it's important that we push the bid as far as we can to get stuff up there, if we can't do it ourselves, of course.
And I think that is something that we do need to look at, is the programme of continue a programme of events wherever possible within our town centre, and looking at a communication strategy which will come through the working group, and that's being currently developed. I understand that looking at a template that was used during the THI works, because that was very effective in communicating with the residents and the businesses within the town centre, and I would look to use what's been considered best practice previously to do that, but we do need to keep everybody engaged. And that's why not just the partnership who will be looking at the strategy and going forward, but the Town Centre Forum is going to have a significant role to play in doing that communication and being a conduit up and down from the partnership and to the partnership, and that will have the wider membership of those that live, work, use the town centre.
As far as Grimston Station is concerned, if some of this money is going towards it, as you know, there's a very active campaign at the moment for that locally, through Councillor Murtagh on Sestan, or was it Sustan?
Yes,
I'm not quite sure of it. And Councillor Colley through Cosla, I think.
Yes.
So to put the pressures on ScotRail.
There is.
Yeah. So this, if we contribute to Grimston, it will be part of a package, I take it.
That's my understanding, is they've actually have escalated the Falkirk stations into their improvement plan, and there's a number of aspects that they're looking at, none the least around disabled access at Grimston Station, which we know is very challenging as it is. So what we have to do is to make sure we're aligned and there's no duplication, obviously, and that way we may well get a bit more out of whatever funding's available to look at improving certainly a first stage, but also looking at further down the line.
They wander into territory over which I have no jurisdiction whatsoever in Bowness.
We all feel like that.
Is the library listed? A listed building?
It is a listed building, but it's a grade 3, is that?
Because I recall a lot of years ago there was a proposal to put in an external lift, because it's almost impossible to put in an internal one.
Yes.
So there'll be plans somewhere down in Abbotsford House.
I think they've been dusted out, and that is something that is being looked at, and potential sources of external funding again to support that, because that would improve the access and make better use of that facility. For me, the Bowness Library is quite a historic building. It's well located within our town centre, and I would be sort of very disappointed if there was a decision to move it out of the town centre, because it's very much a focal point, and Bowness needs that focal point for the football.
Agreed. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, any other member? John?
Can I just make a comment? I understand what we're saying here about keeping the momentum in Falkirk Town Centre. I think that we need to also be aware that we don't want to alienate the other town centres that we have, given that there was, I can't remember what Mary Jane's title was, but she was in charge of Steny, Denny, Falkirk and Grangemouth and Bowness, and I think that the people who live in these areas, not forgetting the Braes, also need to feel some sense of inclusion. I know we often talk about the country being London-centric, but I think we need to be careful that we're not Falkirk-centric here.
I think that's been recognised, particularly in the work that's going in Bowness and in Grangemouth, because we know that those particular areas have been affected over recent times, and there's not been any sort of real investment into those areas, whereas there has been a lot of work done in Denny and Stennismuir over the last few years. So that's why there's a focus there, and we hope that that's recognised, but there's a lot of work going on locally. Bowness have just recently agreed a Bowness bid there, which will engage with the businesses and look at further work around developing the business sector in Bowness, and that's been received very positively there. And there's a lot of work around locality planning and looking at the town centre of Grangemouth in particular, and what it may well start to look like. And as it develops further, we may end up with a similar type grouping as we have in Falkirk, looking at Grangemouth and taking that forward. Of course, the Grangemouth is likely to be one of the significant recipients of the growth deal investment, and we're continuing to work on getting that over the line.
Okay, I appreciate that, but as I say, I mean, a lot of the people that live in Grangemouth are aware, obviously there's a huge generation of economy, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of spend of economy within the town centre specifically. I know that we've got the flood defence scheme, but that in itself is not particularly for the benefit of the residents themselves, so I just wanted to raise that. Thanks.
Okay, any other member happy to agree? Okay, our final item is the winter service plan. I know it's June. Calendar-wise, it's June. It may not feel like summer, but this is a winter service plan. It was delayed to allow further consultation with elected members, and hence the reason it's come just now. Mrs. Geisler?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, as you say, there's been fairly extensive consultation on the proposals to change our winter service plan. The previous plan was approved by members in August 2011, so obviously it's due for a review in any event, but the catalyst for change this time is the issue of the revised Code of Practice for well-managed highway infrastructure. This is a document which has been adopted and approved by all local authority highways authorities, together with Department for Transport and a number of professional organisations. And this is recognised as good practice in respect of winter maintenance. The Council has a statutory responsibility in terms of the 1984 Act, Road Scotland Act 1984, to take such steps as it considers to be reasonable to keep the roads and footways free of snow and ice, endangering the safe passage of vehicles and pedestrians. That's a very general obligation, and the Code of Practice is used fairly extensively to support actions to meet those statutory obligations. So by following this code, that helps us to demonstrate that we are indeed taking this reasonable approach as is described in the legislation. The plan itself has been reviewed in accordance with the new Code of Conduct and the revised Code of Practice, and the revised plan is attached as an appendix to the report. There's also been an opportunity taken to revise grip bin provision to allow the community to self-help, as in periods past we've seen there's been a very positive approach to that. The plan allows us to demonstrate, to actually effect and demonstrate a consistent and reasonable level of treatment throughout the priorities, and is focused on taking a risk-based approach to the activity. There were a number of briefing sessions, as you mentioned, Convener, with elected members, which certainly the officers found to be very helpful. I hope the members did too, and the local knowledge that members were able to bring to the table has influenced the final shape of the plan, because we are encouraged to take local circumstances into account. The only other thing I would mention is that this is a risk-based approach that we're taking. It is one that is supported nationally, and accordingly I've moved to go to recommending the revised plan to members today. The recommendation is to approve and adopt the plan as attached to the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Geisler. Councillor Garner.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you to the Director. I think she's actually read my script, because she's covered nearly every point I was going to make. But I'd also like to thank her team, and especially Dot Reid and Gary Neal, who have been incredibly helpful and patient during many discussions I've had with them in the past few months. And I do believe they're two of our most dedicated officers. So rather than reading out sort of things that the Director's already said, community empowerment's a big part of this, and it was taken into account. And given the way we all came together, and you saw the desire to self-help was evidence in events like the Beast from the East. As a result of the policy has been changed to double the amount of community grip bins provision from 4 per square kilometre to 8 per square kilometre. Community grip bins are placed in communities which do not meet the criteria for a normal grip bin, i.e. on a bend, steep hill, etc., or form part of an existing gritting route. But as I say, the Director's covered everything else there in the report that was one to pick out. So I'm happy to formally move the recommendation held within this report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Garner. Somebody happy to say? Councillor Bice?
Yeah, can I also just say that in the consultation part with Dot and Gary, it was absolutely superb. We made some adjustments as we were in the committee to it, and they have been done already, which was very impressive. So I have absolutely no problem, and I'm absolutely delighted to second this report.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments from members? No? Happy to approve? Okay. Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your attendance.